If you're a big old Ben Reilly fan, you've probably been major league disappointed with what Marvel Comics has been doing with the character. I don't know, 15, 20 years, something like that. We did get the Scarlet Spider, which was actually a pretty cool series. It felt like they had a purpose for Ben Reilly, then they just abruptly kind of quit it. Not that he was ever like a big time seller and rivaled Amazing Spider-Man or anything important like that, but it was consistently pretty cool. And Ben Reilly certainly has an enormous amount of history within Marvel Comics, specifically with Spider-Man, obviously the Clone Saga and all that kind of stuff rolling out of it. But Ben Reilly is no longer the choice of the day. He's a little bit too white, a little too stale and pale, as they might say in the entertainment industry. He's needed to be moved aside because there are other characters that are just far more valuable and important by the name of Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen. Yes, Spider-Gwen, the character that can't move 15 comic books right now, because nobody's actually interested in the character besides the freaking movie. And this is all coming from Tom Brevoort's Man with a Hat Substack. While I do not appreciate Tom Brevoort's shepherding, we'll use that word, stewardship, how's that? His stewardship of the X-Men line right now. I do appreciate his transparency when it comes to answering questions on his Substack and being very open and honest about why a lot of these things have happened, why a lot of decisions have been made. And most of the time, it always ends up kind of worse than you anticipated, and this being a case, because he got a question about Ben Reilly. When Ben Reilly was brought back in Clone Conspiracy, what was your reaction to that decision? Do you think it was the right call to take away the spotlight from Kane and give it back to Ben instead? To which Tom replied, I can't really say too much about how it ultimately worked out, but I thought at the idea of bringing Ben Reilly back and crafting him into a dark mirror image of Spider-Man, an antagonist, made an awful lot of sense. Now, there's more information coming there, but I have to agree with Tom Brevoort on that respect, that Ben Reilly is a terribly tragic character. When you think about really tragic characters in the annals of comic book history, an Incredible Hulk kind of comes out where you got this character that's super duper smart, he could save the world. He's such a genius, but he's got this monster inside him that's been put in there with the gamma rays. And he can't keep it from coming out, and he ends up being very destructive. The antithesis of who Bruce Banner really is, in his human form at least. And you think about like Ben Grimm, the Thing. Sure, he's great as the Thing, and he's like a living rock, and he likes to go clobber in time and beat people up. But there's nothing Ben Grimm would like more than to not be that. He would like to be very much human. And when you get to Ben Reilly, the realization that you weren't real, you're a clone. Peter Parker is the real Spider-Man. All of your memories belong to somebody else. You never lived the life that you believe that you've lived. All those personal relationships that you think are there aren't personal relationships. They actually belong to somebody else. Terribly tragic character, and something that really is the foundation of something special. And at times it felt like Ben Reilly was going to be special. And him as an antagonist who believes that Spider-Man essentially stole his life, even though Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is the original. Although if you read Clone Conspiracy or Clone Saga, it gets very, very difficult. And they changed their mind on who the real Spider-Man was several times. At one point, it certainly was going to be Ben Reilly, but then they realized, wait, everybody actually likes Peter Parker, and that was ripped away from him, making the character even more tragic because it ended up playing out almost in real life that way as well. So the idea that Ben Reilly could be a very tragic, relatable, but formidable antagonist to Peter Parker, being a clone of him, having all his powers and everything, and also his memories and spider sense, and being able to anticipate what Peter's going to do and wanting to rip that all away because he feels like it belongs to him, was the makings of a classic Joker-style villain for Spider-Man. And certainly Spider-Man has the best rogues gallery in all Marvel Comics, no doubt about it. He's got loads of great villains, but Ben Reilly had the potential at one point to be the number one villain, and it certainly hasn't turned out that way. And as of late, we just don't see Ben Reilly a lot unless he's like Chasm, which isn't very cool. But Tom Brevoort elaborated, continuing on answering the question on why that is the case. As Nick Lowe has said on a couple of occasions, especially given the success of Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen, there really isn't a whole lot of room on stage for yet another middle-of-the-road Spider character, especially not one with all the history baggage that Ben brings along with him. And certainly Ben Reilly brings a load of baggage with him coming along with Clone Saga and all the things that happened to him, the way that he feels and all that stuff. But the idea that there's no room for Ben Reilly, an intriguing, really layered, tragic character that could be an enormous foil for Peter Parker and could have an enormous redemptive arc over time if you really did it right. That could be something that people talk about for years with Ben Reilly, with Scarlet Spider or Chasm, however you want to do it as an antagonist for Spider-Man. Like, it was all thrown aside because Spider-Gwen is just so popular. And I hate this conflation that because Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider is mildly popular in animated movie franchise that's not really even geared towards the comic book readers themselves, all of a sudden she's very important in the comic books as well, even though no one gives a flying crap about Gwen Stacy as Spider-Gwen or Ghost Spider, because once you get into Marvel 616, the most important thing about Gwen Stacy is that she was Peter's first love and that she died tragically and he couldn't save her. And that's her big role in that. And that's the legacy that she has. And you could make Gwen Stacy 1,000 things in other multiverses, and it's never really going to work in comic books because she's not going to be important. But because she was in a movie that was successful, she's also important. We don't have room for what might be the most layered, nuanced, interesting Spider-Man villain in a very long time. And that is the tragic flaw of Amazing Spider-Man at Marvel Comics these days. It's Nick Lowe himself, because he's so fucking stupid. He can't see the forest through the trees. That success in an animated movie by Sony doesn't guarantee success within the Marvel Comics universe. And he hasn't read the room and realized ultimately that nobody really gives a flying crap about Spider-Gwen. Do people care about Miles Morales? Certainly a lot more than Spider-Gwen, and probably more than Ben Reilly, at least newer fans. Miles has had his own ongoing for a long time. Whether you think it's good or not, he's certainly had some cool stories, but a lot of his more interesting stories are just rehashes of things that happened to Peter Parker. But there at least is an audience to speak of for Miles Morales when it comes to the Marvel Comics universe. So you really can't debate that one. But the Spider-Gwen one is the one that's just truly nuts because it's never translated into comic book success whatsoever, and there's really nothing there. And people that watch Spider-Gwen in Across the Spider-Verse or Beyond the Spider-Verse or Into the Spider-Verse or whatever, and they're like, oh, I would like to read more about that character, and they come to Marvel Comics, they're like, oh, this is a really shitty version of that character that I literally have no interest in, where you have this awesome, cool character, and I really do love his design as Scarlet Spider, where he's got the red suit, but he's got the blue hoodie pullover. I thought that was really cool. It really distinguished him, and obviously he has his own name, which Miles Morales doesn't even have that. He can't even get his own freaking name to separate him from Spider-Man. And certainly the history of Ben Reilly with Peter Parker and the Spider-Man lore is far more intricate and interweaved with the history of Peter Parker than Miles Morales will ever be. Peter Parker might be, if you consider it this way, and I don't even know that I do, might be slightly a mentor for Miles. They certainly try to push it, but it never really takes, and nobody really cares about that. Go read Spectacular Spider-Man. What an awful piece of dog shit that is that's been coming out as of late. And I would much rather see a very interesting take on Ben Reilly being elevated up to being an awesome antagonist. But Nick Lowe just doesn't think it's important because we need Spider-Gwen the Ghost Spider from Stephanie Phillips. More work for the generic Stephanies rather than creating a compelling villain for Spider-Man, which he could definitely use at this point. Because after Dan Slott and what Zeb Wells has done, a lot of these Spider-Man villains have not been treated well over the years. This is the final points that Brevoort made answering that question. But as an enemy who believes that Peter Parker stole his life and whom readers at one point followed as a lead character, there's a lot of strong emotional grist to play with, and Kane continues to be Kane, which is fine. I don't really think that his transition to becoming the Scarlet Spider himself worked all that well, speaking about when he became basically a superhero. I thought Scarlet Spider was interesting. I thought it was kind of fun. Like I said, I really liked the look. There was something there. There was enough of a fan base that you could at least have an ongoing series with him. I know that Yellow Flash is an enormous fan of Ben Reilly. And, of course, we don't even have Scarlet Spider anymore. Now we have Chasm, which, honestly, Chasm has a fantastic look. It's bright. It pops off. It's pretty evil looking. But then he's essentially just the original Venom. he wants to kill Peter because Peter took something dear from him, which is a good baseline, I think, for what Chasm could be, because he's got a good look. I don't know that the name is great, but it's certainly not Spider-Man, and that works for me. But they never added layers to him. They never made him interesting. They just kind of gave him a weird girlfriend. We're like, yeah, he doesn't like you, Spidey. What are you going to do about it? And it became very boring and blasé very quickly because they gave it to Zeb Wells instead of putting it in the hands of like a real comic book writer that could develop a cool idea, like the foundational elements of Chasm that are there. It's a cool idea, but you needed someone to really go out there and execute it. And they've certainly tried to execute and elevate Ben Reilly a few times as a villain over the years, but they've never really been able to make it work. But that's the direction I would go. I would be prioritizing Ben Reilly as Chasm, if that's the persona that you want to use, because the look is good. The name is fine. It's not great. But I would prioritize that every single day of the week over Spider-Gwen. I would be giving up on Spider-Gwen because there's no money to be made there. What's she going to do? Not be Peter Parker? At least Ben Reilly serves a purpose. At least Ben Reilly has layers. There's interesting stories to be told there. But you have Nick Lowe in charge, and we've got to, put Ben Reilly to the wayside because Spider-Gwen was in a couple of popular movies that probably a lot of Marvel Comics fans don't even watch. And if they do watch, they're like, wow, what a much better version of Spider-Gwen than the crap that we get in comic books. But I get the Miles Morales thing. I get it. But the old pale and stale, he's a white, straight character, nothing to see here kind of thing, I do think has been, a point of contention among Marvel Comics fans. And a lot of times, once you see somebody that's working and something that has some interesting steps to it and they get pushed off, it's like, oh, well, we got to get a little diversity in there. We got to get the girl Spider-Man. We need to get the Latino Black Spider-Man in there at the expense of a Ben Reilly who, quite frankly, has more history and better stories to tell than both of them, to be honest, as a villain. But there you go. If you've been wondering what happened to old Ben Reilly, Tom Brevoort let the cat out of the bag. Nick Lowe, pale and stale. Let's put him to the wayside. We got to make Spider-Gwen a thing, even though she's never, ever going to work. Obviously, I talked about that a few days ago. I do appreciate you coming by and visiting me today. If you appreciate what we're doing here on Think Critical YouTube, this week highlighting an awesome character like Ben Reilly that had so much more great stories to tell, but they've just dropped the ball so spectacularly on him at Marvel Comics. I definitely want to invite you to come visit me on Think Critical Patreon. That's the best place to support the channel, to support the mission, keep everything moving forward. And you get awesome bonus content, mostly in the form of podcasts, but you also get exclusive videos, polls, things of that nature. Hope to see you there very soon. Link in the video description.